Hey everybody, welcome back to another fun and exciting geometry class. Today we're going to do something a little different. I've actually invited a guest lecturer to come in and talk to you about a new topic called deductive reasoning. Something that's a little bit different. We're going to be transitioning away from kind of terms and facts in geometry, and we're going to be using what's called deductive reasoning. We're going to do some things. I'm going to do another lesson later about it as well, kind of tack on what's going to happen in today's lesson. But the person that I'm going to have talk to you today is actually my brother-in-law. He is married to my wife's sister, and he's also in education, and he works for a curriculum development company. He basically writes textbooks, and he's one of the most logical people that I know, and he is perfect for this. He studies a lot of like ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and all these different guys, and he knows a lot about different things, logic and things like that. So he's going to talk to you. His video came out a little weird. Up in the upper corner you're going to see that he's cut off, so you're only seeing the bottom part of his head. But other than that, it's a real good video. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, my name is Marc Hays. I am Mr. Steve's brother-in-law, and like Mr. Steve, I work in education, and I am a curriculum developer for an education company as well as a tutor for some students. And Mr. Steve has asked me to present to you on the topic of deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning, what in the world? Those are two very uncommon words. We don't use these typically when we're sitting around the table eating a meal, do we? But you're in geometry now, and you're about to be starting some geometry proofs. And as you look at geometry proofs, you are going to be using this thing called deductive reasoning. Mr. Steve will teach you how to use it with geometry, but for now I'm just going to introduce you to what it means. What is deductive reasoning? And let's start with the beginning, Genesis, the book of beginnings. And let's read from Genesis 1:26. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So God created man on the sixth day, part the way through the day. He created other things on day 6 as well, but he said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And this sets man apart from any other creature on earth. God made the sun and the moon and the stars and the heavens and the earth and the day and the night and the water and the dry land. And he made the fish and the birds and the cattle and the creeping things and the lions and the tigers and the bears. He created everything. And then he said, now something different. We're going to make man in our image after our likeness. You, my friend, are unlike every other thing in earth, and you bear the honor and the abilities of being made in God's image. And one of the abilities God has given you is what's known as reason. He's made you a rational being. What does that mean? Reason. Well, we use that word, don't we? Hey, Mom, I want to go hang out with my friends. Why do you want to go hang out with your friends? Well, because I like them and they got cool games and they like me. All of those are reasons, right? Your mom's just asked you, why do you want to go hang out? And you said, the reasons. So there's the word reasoning and reasons. In Job was afflicted, right? And his friends were kind of trying to be helpful, maybe. And Job said, hear now my reasoning, and hearken to the pleadings of my lips. So there's Job in the scriptures using the word reasoning. In Luke 9, now we're in the Gospels, it says, then there arose a reasoning among them. Which of them should be the greatest? Do you remember this passage? This is the disciples. Which of them would be the greatest? Who would sit at Christ's right hand? And they sat there reasoning, kind of like you would give your mom reasons to go hang out with your friends. The disciples were thinking, why would Christ pick me? Let me tell you my reasons. And then another disciple would say, oh yeah, let me tell you my reasons. I'll tell you my reasons. They're reasoning, right? So if all of that biblical explanation, you just wish that you could just get a dictionary definition, let me give you a dictionary definition. This is from dictionary.com. And it says reasoning is the process of forming conclusions, keyword, judgments, or inferences from facts or premises. Premises and conclusions. Don't forget those words, okay? Premises and conclusions. Reasoning is the process of forming conclusions, judgments, or inferences from facts or premises. You've heard the word conclusion before, right? What was the conclusion of the movie? What was the conclusion of the book? What was the conclusion of the pastor's sermon? All of these refer to the ending. What happened at the end? So when you're reasoning, if you have reasons for something, you're eventually going to get to your conclusion. And all of the reasons that get you to your conclusion are known as the premises. After a series of premises, you will get to a conclusion. After a series of reasons, you will get to the thing you're trying to make the statement about, the conclusion. All right, so we've talked about reasoning, and I told you at the beginning that this would be a little lecture on deductive reasoning. Well, why do we need the word deductive? Does that mean that there's another kind of reasoning besides deductive? Yes, there is another kind. There are several kinds, but on this webinar, we're just going to talk about two kinds, inductive and deductive. Inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning, which is not the one we're getting to, but it's the one we'll start with. Inductive reasoning argues from or tries to make a point from particular premises to a more general conclusion. That may seem like that's not helpful. Let's work on it some more. When we say that we get to a general conclusion, that conclusion is going to be probable. It's probably the answer, but it's not definitely the answer. All right, if that's not helpful yet, let's compare inductive reasoning with deductive, and let's compare them. Deductive reasoning argues from general premises. Remember that the premises are your reasons for something. Argues from general premises to a more particular conclusion. So if you look back to inductive, you see a swap of two words, right? Inductive argues from particular premises to a general conclusion. Deductive argues from general premises to a more particular conclusion. And as opposed to the conclusion of an inductive argument or inductive reasoning being probable, or it's likely that it will happen, the conclusion of deductive reasoning is certain. If it is a good, or what we would call a valid and sound deductive argument, the conclusion is certain. There is no doubt that you have reached the end of your argument. That is certain. All right, so let's talk about inductive reasoning for a little more, because we're not going to spend much time here. We're going to move into deductive because that's the topic. But let's think about inductive. Let's say that on Monday morning, you have eggs for breakfast. You don't know what you're going to have. You just wake up and you come downstairs and there's eggs on your plate for breakfast. You're like, ooh, I like eggs. Eat my eggs. Then on Tuesday, you come down and there's eggs on your plate for breakfast. Ooh, I still like eggs. Even though I had it yesterday, I still like them. I'll eat my eggs. The third day, you come downstairs and you have eggs for breakfast. Well, this is the third day. I like eggs. Thursday, you come downstairs and there's eggs for breakfast. You're like, Monday eggs, Tuesday eggs, Wednesday eggs, Thursday eggs. Then you start thinking, Friday. What will I have for breakfast on Friday? If I had to guess, I'm going to guess this is egg week, and we're going to have eggs for breakfast. Now, are you certain that you're going to have eggs for breakfast Friday just because you had a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? Could it be something else? It could. It could be anything else. But there's a pattern. I'm looking at this pattern, and it's saying that if I take all these particular breakfasts, remember our word particular? If we take each particular breakfast and try to make a conclusion, draw a conclusion about Friday's breakfast, we're going to take all of our particulars and say a general conclusion, this must be egg week. We're going to have eggs for breakfast on Friday. But that conclusion is only probable. You do not know for sure that you're going to have eggs. So that's what you have with inductive. And when you have inductive reasoning, there's two categories that we're not even going to go into, but just to give you the names. With inductive reasoning, you can have strong inductive reasoning and you can have weak inductive reasoning. Sometimes you may take some particular premises and draw a conclusion from it, but they weren't really that strong. So there's strong and there's weak, but they never lead to certainty, just probability. But that's what inductive reasoning for. There's no problem with that. That's what it's for. But let's look more closely at deductive reasoning, because that's what this webinar is about. So now you see in the top box, now we're looking at deductive reasoning. And I've left the definition up there, that deductive reasoning argues from general premises to a more particular conclusion. And by argue here, I don't mean an argument like where two people are fighting. I just mean an argument where somebody is taking statements about reality, about the world, about their situation, and organizing those statements in such a way that you can reach a conclusion. That's called an argument. A lot of times we think an argument is heated or mean-spirited, or don't be mean, don't argue with me. But that's not the argument we're talking about. An argument is just to give your reasons for why you draw the final conclusion. So this deductive reasoning argues from general premises to a more particular conclusion. And this conclusion from deductive reasoning is certain. It's not like whether you think you might have eggs for breakfast on Friday. This one is certain. Okay. So there's two results of deductive reasoning. Your argument, your deductive reasoning could either be invalid or valid. You can see that the root word there is valid. So it either is valid or it's not valid. An invalid deductive reasoning means that even if the premises are true, the logic does not imply the conclusion. And we'll look at some of these. Your premises are all of your reasons. They can all be true. But when you get to the final conclusion, the reasons don't lead you there. The logic doesn't work. It's got a problem with it. And so you can't prove your argument as certain like deductive reasoning is supposed to do. However, a valid deductive argument means that if the premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily and certainly follows. If the premises are true in a valid argument, the conclusion will necessarily follow. And that's what I mean by the conclusion is certain. Now, you can have a valid argument where the premises are not true. And we'll look at one of those in a minute. But if they are true and it is a valid argument, then deductive reasoning will lead you to what's called a sound conclusion. The conclusion is sound when two things are true about the argument. The argument is valid. It is a logical arrangement of reasons that does necessarily lead to the conclusion, and the premises are true. Now, you can have an argument that sounds really good. You're like, I think that might lead to that. It is logically valid. But if one of the premises is false, then you get an unsound conclusion. It may be a valid argument with an unsound conclusion. So let's look at some of these with deductive reasoning. Okay, so let's look at a couple of valid arguments that are examples of deductive reasoning, where if the premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily and certainly follows. We're going to look at two valid syllogisms, one that is sound and one that's unsound. And you can see that the sound argument is there beside the box with the word sound in it. The unsound argument is next to the box that says unsound. We'll look at the valid and sound argument first. And it goes like this. All dogs are mammals. All chihuahuas are dogs. Therefore, all chihuahuas are mammals. That is an argument that is valid, meaning that if the premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows. And it is also a valid argument where the premises are both true. All dogs are mammals. All chihuahuas are dogs. And because of the construction of the argument, because of the way the argument is put together in its sentences, the conclusion necessarily follows. You can see the two premises, all dogs are mammals. Anything that's a mammal, anything that's a dog is included in mammal. All chihuahuas are dogs. Anything that's a chihuahua is included in dogs. So if all the chihuahuas are included in dogs and all dogs are included in mammals, then all chihuahuas are in the category of mammals. So the conclusion is certainly true, and it is a sound argument because both premises are true. All right, and real quickly, let's look at the unsound argument. The first premise, all people with beards are teachers, and Mr. Steve is a person with a beard, therefore Mr. Steve is a teacher. The logic follows. It's the same logic as the one above it about chihuahuas. But are the premises true? It is a valid argument, but is it sound? Or is one or two of the premises false? All people with beards are teachers. Do you know any people with beards that are not teachers? I do too. That's not true. There are plenty of people with beards who aren't teachers. Therefore, that premise is false. So no matter how true the other two are, Mr. Steve is a person with a beard. Mr. Steve is a teacher. Those are both true, but it is not a sound argument because one of the premises or both of the premises are false. So now let's look at invalid arguments, where even if the premises are true, the logic does not imply the conclusion. Looking at an invalid argument, some teachers have beards. That's true. Some teachers do have beards. Mr. Steve has a beard. That's true. Mr. Steve does have a beard. Therefore, Mr. Steve is a teacher. Well, that's true. Mr. Steve is a teacher. All three of these premises are true, but does the conclusion necessarily follow the premises? Some teachers have beards. That's true. Some teachers do. Mr. Steve has a beard. Okay. Some teachers have beards. Mr. Steve has a beard. Does that necessarily imply that he's a teacher? Once again, like we asked the question from before, just because some teachers have beards, does that mean every teacher has a beard? So all three of those statements, both premises and the conclusion, are true, but the logic is not valid. The conclusion does not follow from the premises. And let's look at one more invalid argument. Some baseball players are from the Dominican Republic. Fernando Tatis Jr. is from the Dominican Republic. Therefore, Fernando Tatis Jr. is a baseball player. Now, if you look at these arguments, they're the same kind of argument, again, just with different statements. And once again, they're all true. Are there some baseball players from the Dominican Republic? Yes. Look at all three statements. Are they all true? They are all true. But the logic doesn't follow. The deductive reasoning does not imply the conclusion. And so therefore, this is an invalid argument. And any argument that is shaped this way will not be a valid argument. So here's a brief lesson on deductive reasoning. We talked about reasoning in general. We learned about ourselves as being made in the image of God and some examples of reasoning from Scripture. We talked about inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive, from particulars to general. Deductive, from general principles down to the particulars. And then we also talked about valid and invalid deductive arguments, as well as sound and unsound valid arguments. Thank you for joining me for this lesson on deductive reasoning.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Marc Hays. That was great. We appreciate you doing that for us. And what an amazing lecture, just kind of laying out there the idea of reasoning, inductive, deductive reasoning, and just kind of the examples that were used. And I appreciate that. In the next lesson, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie all that information into geometry. How does all that work into geometry? What are we going to be using from that? And how are we going to be using it? Okay? All right, we'll see you later. Have a good one. Bye.